Yo, everyone, how are you? And I wanted to do this because uh, it's going to be an interesting week this week in La Liga, and an interesting week in European football, and an interesting week as far as two teams that are kind of heading into uncharted waters. And I say this because when Barcelona step onto the pitch midweek for Champions League, and then at the weekend at the Camp Nou against Real Madrid, it'll be kind of weird. It's kind of like foreshadowing things to come, maybe. And I say this because of number one, how is Barcelona going to react without Lionel Messi? Now, it's happened before. It's not something that you see with a team that has had, I guess, decent success, or at least had once in one stretch decent success, enough that it kind of found a way to stay above water and then waited for Leo to come back. And eventually he did come back. And of course, they ended up having the success that they did. The big problem is that this isn't the same team that we're talking about a couple of years back when they did win the league title. The big problem now is you have a player that exclusively has been the leading assist man, the leading goal scorer, the leading creator of opportunities for your team. How do you replace that? Now, let's kind of look in the opposite direction as well. And we see a team like Real Madrid. And what's their biggest problem? Well, their biggest problem is that it's very difficult. I mean, regardless of how you want to look at it, it's very difficult to just replace 40 goals with the same team, just maybe adding a couple of players here and there. Mariano is a player with a great deal of potential, but never is he going to score 40, 35, 30, 40 goals a year. He's not going to. The best season that Karim Benzema had was 25 goals. So you're not going to be able to get that more additional productivity out of him. Same thing with Gareth Bale. You're not going to have that. At the same time, you have also players like Isco, like Vasquez as well. How are they going to be able to fit into their new roles? They haven't. They have not been able to because of the absence of Ronaldo. Now, you can hate him, you can love him, you can whatever, but you have to admit that those types of numbers, those types of performances aren't something you're just going to substitute, out of thin air. It's just not going to happen. And in Real Madrid's case, pretty much they're looking to replace him out of thin air. Now, is it an ego thing? Maybe. Is it the lack of preparation of the situation? Probably too. But you start to see how certain players affect certain teams. And again, going back to Barcelona's case as I bounce back, how are they going to work without Messi on the pitch? We've seen that there's been times that Ernesto Valverde has wanted to give him a break. And as soon as he sees that the team doesn't have the same functionality, he has to bring him in, and things might change a little bit. They might get the draw, they might get a result, but it's not the most convincing of performances. So let's start out right there. Let's start out seeing it from that perspective that it's going to be a tough road ahead. And it's going to be pretty much a telltale sign of future things when Messi retires in a couple of years' time. He's 31, going on 32. So we're not talking about the same young spring chicken that we were, praising just a couple of years ago. I mean, there's some wear and tear in those legs. There's going to be more, and hopefully that is something that this team can recover from. And yeah, the next couple of weeks, and it's not just going to be this match, because keep in mind that Espanyol is really hot on their tails. And if things continue going the way they were, it won't be this derby. It won't be this Clásico that ends up being the one that tells the difference so far, at least in the first leg. Let's just keep it in perspective first and foremost. It could be the match at Cornellà del Prat that really starts to take precedence over this if these two teams continue to go in the direction that they were heading. That to me is probably going to be more telling. That match over in Barcelona, the Catalan derby, will probably end up being one that even tells a greater story as how things end up really progressing. Because this, look, let's be honest, people can talk about two-team race or two-team league. That's not going to be the case this year. Leganés is having a great season, or a better season, or at least a competitive season, I should say. Alaves Well, we already know what's going on with them. Espanyol in second place, I think, for the first time in nearly 60 years. At any point, at this deep into the season, forget at any point. I think it's the first time in 60 plus years that that's happened for Espanyol. Let's just keep that in perspective. Also, Sevilla, also Atleti with a chance to be able to move in. And they've had their struggles too offensively. They're a team that, believes a great deal in the 1-0 and going on lockdown and being able to create opportunities on there, but it just doesn't happen. This season, it hasn't been as successful as in seasons past. Let's just be completely honest about that. Sevilla, it's interesting to see what Sevilla is looking to do this year, but do they have enough depth? Especially when they're playing in multiple fronts, especially when Copa del Rey starts to creep in and you have the potential or the possibility to have to end up with, a possible rotation, if you will, trying to keep players as fresh as possible because January and February end up being those, kind of dog days of summer in winter, I guess you could say, in Spanish football. How's that going to play out? And again, going back to the big problem here that we're facing, Real Madrid. How are they going to behave? How are they going to react? Because a lot of the blame is being put on Julian Lopetegui. And there is maybe some, I couldn't say all of it, if you're catching my drift. All the blame goes in that direction. The players have to execute at a certain point. The players have to be able to step forward and say, hey, you know what? We have a dose of responsibility. I know one person that won't go up and of course, say, hey, mea culpa. It's going to be Florentino Perez. Florentino Perez destabilized the national team in order to help out his team, and in the process ends up kind of just at the first whim already start talking about Santiago Solari, starts talking about bringing back Jose Mourinho, starts talking about all these things. And mind you, when you hear the Spanish or the Madrid press, I should be more specific, the Madrid press talking about those things, something's been coming out of Florentino Perez's mouth. That for sure. So make sure that you keep that in mind every time you start to hear names, speculations. Florentino's saying something. He might not be saying directly, but he's kind of like floating it out there, saying, hey, let's see how this goes and see where this ends up working out. Because that's what ends up being in certain situations like these. It's maybe not about how the team functions. It's more about what ends up being more dramatic and ends up giving a bit more interest to fans to follow this team. It sounds crazy, but at times that has been the case, not just in recent years, because there's been a bit more stability, if you will, knowing what Zinedine Zidane was able to do and going back with Carlo Ancelotti to a certain extent. This team has had a bit of stability, and I'm talking about within the context of Real Madrid, there's been stability in the coaching ranks. Again, I'm using that term loosely, but you understand what I'm saying. If you look at the past 7 years, there haven't been 7 coaches. There's been 3, not 4 if you include Julian Lopetegui. So to me, there's a lot to be looking at. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot that really needs to be delved into. This week will be a very interesting week here, as well as over on my Patreon account. There'll be, throwing little tidbits here and there as far as everything's concerned. So keep tuned. Check things out. Make sure that you're ready to go. Make sure that you're catching every little bit. And of course, over on Beyond the Pitch as well, because we'll definitely have a lot of content for Champions League as well as El Clásico coming up this weekend. So make sure you're tuned. Make sure you're following. Make sure you're asking people to subscribe here on my YouTube channel. Make sure that everything's cool. And make sure that you're part of the gang here, either here on my YouTube channel as well as over my Patreon account, so you can stay up to date with what's going on. Okay? Talk to you soon. Peace.